The dust kicked up from Martha's worn boots as she stood at the edge of what used to be her family's homestead. 3 months had passed since the bankmen came with their papers, their cold eyes, and their final notice. 3 months since she'd watched her husband Samuel load their last possessions onto a borrowed wagon, his shoulders bent with shame that wasn't his to carry. The drought had taken their crops 2 seasons running, but it was the betrayal of Samuel's own brother that had sealed their fate. "Trust me," Jacob had said, his smooth words flowing like honey as he convinced Samuel to sign over the deed as collateral for what he called a sure thing cattle investment. Family takes care of family. But when the investment crumbled and the debts came due, Jacob was nowhere to be found, and the bank held papers that made strangers the owners of land that had been in Samuel's family for 3 generations. Now Martha stood alone in the gathering dusk, having walked the 15 miles from the cramped room they rented above the mercantile in town. Samuel was working late again at the loading dock, his proud rancher's hands now blistered from hauling freight for pennies on the dollar. Their children, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Thomas, were helping Mrs. Henderson with her evening chores in exchange for supper. Pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. The wind whispered through the empty windows of what had been their home, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain that might never come. Martha closed her eyes and let the familiar ache wash over her. It wasn't just the loss of the land, though, that cut deep enough. It was watching her husband's spirit dim a little more each day, seeing her children try to be brave when they asked why they couldn't go home, wondering if God had simply forgotten that the Henderson family existed. She'd come here tonight because she needed to remember who she was before the world fell apart. Before Jacob's betrayal, before the endless string of hardships that seemed to follow them like a shadow. She needed to find that place inside herself where hope lived, even if it was buried under layers of disappointment and fear. The old oak tree still stood where it always had, its massive trunk scarred but unbroken despite the harsh years. This was where she'd carved her and Samuel's initials 22 years ago, young and foolish and convinced that love could conquer anything. This was where they'd brought Emma and Thomas as babies to introduce them to the land that would be their inheritance. This was where her own mother had taught her to pray, not with fancy words or complicated theology, but with the raw honesty that comes from a heart that's been broken and mended more times than it cares to count. Martha knelt beneath that tree now, her calloused hands pressed against the earth that no longer belonged to her family but would always be part of her soul. The words came slowly at first, rusty from disuse. She'd been angry at God for so long that prayer had felt like talking to an empty sky. But desperation has a way of stripping away pride, and tonight she was desperate enough to try anything. "Lord," she whispered, her voice catching on the word, "I don't even know where to start. Samuel says we shouldn't bother you with our troubles, that we made our own mess and we'll find our own way out. But I'm not strong enough to carry this alone anymore. I'm watching my family fall apart piece by piece, and I don't know how to hold us together." The admission felt like pulling a splinter from a wound that had festered too long. She'd been trying so hard to be strong for everyone else that she'd forgotten it was okay to be weak, to acknowledge that she couldn't fix everything with sheer determination and stubborn will. "We've lost everything," she continued, the words flowing easier now. "The land, the house, our place in this community. Thomas won't look at other children his age anymore because he's ashamed of the clothes he wears and the fact that we live above a store like vagrant." Emma stopped singing, "Lord." You know how that child always had a song in her heart, but she stopped singing the day we moved to town. "And Samuel, my strong, proud Samuel, looks at me sometimes like he's failed us all, and I don't know how to convince him that he's still the man I fell in love with." A night bird called from somewhere in the darkness, its voice lonely and searching. Martha listened to its song and remembered her mother's words from years ago, when she was just a girl facing her own crisis of faith. "God speaks in all kinds of ways, Martha, sometimes in the thunder and lightning that shake the ground, sometimes in the still small voice that whispers in your heart, and sometimes in the cry of a lonely bird that reminds you that you're not the only one calling out in the darkness." "I know Jacob wronged us," Martha said, her voice stronger. "I know he took advantage of Samuel's trust and love, and part of me wants to hate him for it. But holding on to that anger is like drinking poison and expecting him to die. It's eating me up from the inside, making me bitter and hard in ways I never wanted to be. Help me forgive him, Lord, not because he deserves it, but because I need to be free of the weight I'm carrying." The prayer was becoming something more than words now. It was becoming a conversation, the kind she used to have with her mother during long winter evenings when the work was done, and there was nothing left to do but sit by the fire and speak truth to each other. She felt that same sense of being truly heard, of having her words received by someone who understood the depth of what she was carrying. "I'm not asking for the old life back," she said, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. "That door has closed and maybe it needed to. We got comfortable, maybe even a little proud, thinking we had it all figured out, but I am asking for a new door to open, show us where we're supposed to go from here, give Samuel work that doesn't crush his spirit a little more each day, help our children find their joy again, help me be the wife and mother they need me to be, not the broken woman I've been these past months." As she spoke, memories began surfacing, not of the loss and betrayal that had consumed her thoughts for so long, but of the countless times they'd faced difficulties before and somehow found their way through. The year Thomas was born early and they weren't sure he'd survive, but love and determination had pulled him through. The time the creek flooded and destroyed their first crop, but neighbors had rallied around them with seed and labor to help them try again. The winter Emma got so sick with fever that Martha had sat by her bedside for 6 straight days, praying and cooling her forehead with wet cloths, until the fever finally broke. They'd weathered storms before. This one just felt different because it had come from family, from someone they trust. The betrayal had poisoned their ability to see past the immediate crisis to the possibility that lay beyond it. "I'm tired of being afraid," Martha admitted to the night sky. "Afraid that Samuel will give up on us, on himself. Afraid that my children will grow up thinking that disappointment and struggle are all there is to life. Afraid that I'll become one of those bitter women who've forgotten how to laugh, how to see beauty in simple things, how to believe that tomorrow might be better than today." The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of distant rain and something else, something that smelled like hope. Martha had grown up on this land, had learned to read the sky and the wind the way other people read books. Rain was coming, maybe not tonight, but soon. The drought would break, as it always did eventually. New life would spring from ground that had seemed dead and barren. "Maybe that's what you're trying to teach us," she said, the understanding coming like dawn breaking over the eastern hill. "That sometimes the ground has to lay fallow for a while before it can produce something new. Maybe we needed to lose what we thought we couldn't live without, so we could discover what we really can't live without. Each other, our faith, our ability to start over when everything falls apart." She thought about Samuel, probably still at the dock, loading crates and trying to make enough money to put food on their table. He'd been so ashamed of what he saw as his failure to provide for his family that he'd forgotten his own worth. He'd forgotten that she'd married him not for the land he owned or the security he could provide, but for the man he was. The man who'd work himself to exhaustion for the people he loved. The man who'd taught their son to be honest and their daughter to be brave. The man who still reached for her hand in the darkness when he thought she was asleep, needing that connection to know he wasn't alone in his struggles. "Help him remember who he is," she prayed. "Help him see himself through my eyes, through the children's eyes. He's not a failure because he trusted his brother. He's not less of a man because we lost the ranch. He's still the same person who built that house with his own hands, who taught Thomas to rope cattle and Emma to read the stars. Don't let Jacob's betrayal rob him of knowing his own worth." The prayer was changing her, she could feel it. Not in some magical way that would instantly solve all their problems, but in a deeper way that was shifting her perspective, helping her remember truths she'd forgotten in the midst of crisis. Prayer had always worked that way for her, not as a cosmic vending machine that dispensed miracles on demand, but as a way of aligning her heart with what mattered most, of finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "And the children," she continued, thinking of Emma's silent sadness and Thomas's growing anger. "They're watching us, learning how to handle life's hardships by how we handle ours. I want them to see that setbacks don't have to be endings, that people can be knocked down and still get back up. I want them to know that your love isn't conditional on our circumstances, that you're just as present in the rented room above the mercantile as you were in the house we built with such pride." Martha opened her eyes and looked up through the branches of the old oak tree. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, distant lights that had been shining long before she was born and would continue shining long after she was gone. Her problems, as overwhelming as they felt, were just one small chapter in a much larger story. "I don't know what comes next," she said, getting to her feet and brushing the dust from her skirt, "but I'm ready to find out. I'm ready to stop looking backward at what we lost and start looking forward to what might be waiting for us. Open doors, Lord. new doors we haven't even imagined yet. Give us eyes to see them and courage to walk through them when they appear. As she turned to begin the long walk back to town, Martha felt lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for months. The problems hadn't changed. They still owed money they didn't have, still lived in cramped quarters that smelled like leather goods and lamp oil, still faced an uncertain future with no clear path forward. But something fundamental had shifted inside her, some realignment of priorities that reminded her what she was fighting for and why it was worth the fight. The walk back to town gave her time to think, to plan, to imagine. Maybe Samuel's dock work was just a stepping stone to something better. Maybe there were opportunities in town they never would have discovered if they'd stayed comfortable on the ranch. Maybe their children would benefit from being around more people, from experiencing a different kind of life than the isolated existence they'd known on the homestead. By the time she reached the mercantile, Martha had the beginning of an idea. Mrs. Henderson was getting older, struggling to manage her boarding house and her general store. She'd mentioned more than once that she could use help with the books, with managing the inventory, with the countless details that kept a business running. Martha had always been good with numbers, had managed all the financial aspects of the ranch. Maybe there was an opportunity there, a way for the Henderson family to become valuable to the community instead of just charity cases to be pitied. She climbed the narrow stairs to their room, where she found Samuel sitting at their small table, his head in his hand. The children were asleep on the narrow bed they all shared, Emma curled around her rag doll and Thomas spread out like he was still used to having space to stretch. The sight of her husband's defeated posture should have broken her heart, but instead it filled her with determination. "Samuel," she said softly, not wanting to wake the children, "I've been thinking." He looked up at her with eyes that held so much weariness it nearly took her breath away. "About what, Martha? About how I failed you? About how we're never going to dig out of this hole? About how I should have known better than to trust Jacob with everything we'd worked for?" She moved to stand behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "No," she said firmly, "I've been thinking about new beginnings, about doors opening instead of closing, about the fact that we're all still here, still healthy, still capable of building something good out of this mess." Samuel leaned back against her, and she felt some of the tension leave his body. "I don't see how, Martha. I'm 43 years old, and all I know is ranch. Who's going to hire a washed-up cowboy with no references and a family to feed?" "Mrs. Henderson is going to hire us," Martha said, the words coming out with more confidence than she'd felt moments before. "Both of us. She needs help with the store and the boarding house. I can handle the books and the inventory, deal with the commercial travelers and the supply deliveries. You can handle the heavy work, the repairs, the things that need a strong back and skilled hands. We can make ourselves indispensable to her, Samuel. We can build something new." For the first time in months, she saw a spark of interest in her husband's eyes. "You think she'd consider it? Really consider it? Not just offer us charity work to keep us from starving?" Martha thought about her prayers under the oak tree, about the sense of possibility that had filled her as she walked back to town. "I think God opens doors for people who are ready to walk through them. I think we've spent so much time mourning what we lost, that we haven't been looking for what might be waiting for us. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to Mrs. Henderson about a real partnership, not just a wages, but a chance to have a stake in something again." Samuel turned in his chair to face her fully. "And if she says no?" Martha smiled, feeling more like herself than she had in months. "Then we'll find another door, but I have a feeling she's going to say yes. I have a feeling our hardship is about to become our opportunity if we're brave enough to take it." As they prepared for bed in the cramped space that had felt like a prison just hours before, Martha felt the presence of something larger than their circumstance. Call it God, call it hope, call it the mysterious way that endings sometimes disguise themselves as beginnings. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was no longer afraid of them. The prayer had done what prayers do best. It had reminded her who she was beneath the layers of disappointment and fear. It had reconnected her with the strength that had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. And it had opened her eyes to possibilities that had been there all along, hidden behind her focus on what was lost instead of what could be found. Sometimes the greatest blessing isn't getting your old life back, but discovering that you're capable of building a new one. This prayer will end hardships and open doors to new blessings, not through magic, but through the transformation that happens when a broken heart learns to hope again.